Today we are going to talk about a world addicted to oil. And this subject is very important for all of you. You are young, and what I'm going to talk about will affect your life more than you may think about. There is 65 countries that produce some significant amount of oil. And out of those 65 countries has already 54 peaked. That means they have reached their maximum capacity in production. The important thing is that 1% of all the oil fields in the world are producing 50% of the oil. And when these big giant oil fields is declining, we have the problem. When the big Russian oil field went into decline, they needed 200 other oil fields to replace it.
There's around 50,000 oil fields in the world, and the giant fields are 500, that's around 1%. And for the ultimate reserves, 50% of the reserves are in those 500 fields. So 1% of the world's oil fields are giants, and they hold 50% of the world reserves.
After nearly 100 years of exploration, drilling, and surveying, a conclusion has been reached in regard to the distribution of conventional crude oil on the planet. Some 1.5 trillion barrels of conventional crude are considered proven. In truth, this is an enormous amount of oil. However, globally, we consume 30 billion barrels a year. Ironically, perhaps, more than half of the globe's entire conventional oil reserves are located in a small area in the Persian Gulf, which contains some 715 billion barrels of proven reserves.
Let our position be absolutely clear. An attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on the vital interest of the United States of America. And such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force.
From the very beginning of the 20th century, oil has been closely associated with national security. The United States was, until well close to World War II, the outbreak of World War II, the major supplier of oil to Japan. Roosevelt was not prepared in the 1930s, even coming close to the beginning of the 1940s, to provoke war. And he knew that if the U.S. imposed an embargo on oil to Japan, that could provoke the beginning of war in which the United States would be directly involved. As the Japanese conquest of China became more extensive and more brutal, he determined to cut off oil to Japan. And the Japanese, because they didn't have any oil of their own, therefore had to find another source of petroleum to keep their war machine operating. And the only real source of oil in the region was the Dutch East Indies. So the attack on Pearl Harbor from the Japanese point of view was not to strike at the United States directly, really. It was to cover their flanks to safeguard their oil flow from the Dutch East Indies.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
And so began the most destructive event in the history of humankind. More than 37 million civilians perished in the fires of World War II. Rapidly industrializing states, taking advantage of new technologies, especially the oil-powered combustion engine, acted to increase access to and security over the world's oil fields. The new method of warfighting was mechanized. with air power being the linchpin of controlling the battlefield. Tanks, trucks, planes, ships, and the entire infrastructure of supplying an army in the field absolutely relied on a steady, secure flow of oil in enormous quantities. After the dust had settled and the smoke had cleared, 65 million people worldwide had been killed. The invention of oil-powered mobile military forces ensured that the 20th century would be the bloodiest the human species had ever seen. Unfortunately, the war to gain control over the world's conventional oil reserves was just beginning.